Big D there. She is the executive director of the Delaware County Democratic Party. She's the most hardworking person I can think of in the union. Does an amazing job. And if you ever see her in the office, please say thank you, because she does all the work. So this is an election day training for Delaware County Democrats. If you've been a poll watcher before, most of what you hear here will be similar to what you've done in the past, with a couple of changes. The biggest change for the voter this year is obviously going to paper ballots. And the biggest difference for staff is that we have new machines and new scanners that have not been in use before. So, excuse me, with that, we'll go to the next slide. So there are two parts to this training. Many of you will come on election day and serve as greeters at your polling place, and others will be poll watchers. So the greeter part is for everybody, because everyone that's a poll watcher will also hopefully also do poll watcher stuff. Sorry about that. The first part is for everyone, and the second part is for poll watchers, okay? Next slide. So I just want to let you know there's some information that you should all have. First of all, the voter registration office is a good number for you to have, because if someone comes to a polling place and they believe that they're registered to vote, the voter registration office is the final authority. So you can call them during that day, and this information will be on the paperwork that you get when you come in to help serve as a greeter or a watcher. The second number there is the Delco Board of Elections, their website, and in particular their hotline, 610-891-VOTE. Feel free to use that number anytime if you've got questions about voting or elections. That's specifically manned so that when you make a call, you're not going to stop the election board employees from doing their job of generating more ballots. You'll just talk to folks whose job it is to answer calls. The next website we have here is the voter registration page for the Pennsylvania Dems, or I'm sorry, Pennsylvania Department of State, votespa.com. We will be sending out election protection hotline numbers. We typically have 2 to 3 to 4 numbers that you call in sequence. Please don't ever leave a voicemail on election day. We want to know what's going on in real time, and we may not get back to messages immediately. So if you don't get through immediately, call us again, and we'll go over what to call us on. The last thing is if you can't get through to anyone else, or they can't answer your question, the Delco Dems office would be the best place to call. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to talk a little bit about the greeting area, which is 10 feet away from the entrance to the polls. We'll talk about how it's determined. We're going to talk about who the election day volunteers are. And on the Board of Elections, your point of contact will be the judge of elections. There are multiple other people that will be serving on election boards, but you don't need to know all the different roles if you're coming in as a watcher or a greeter. We will give out general instruction for poll watchers and talk about some general kinds of election day problems and questions that might arise. Okay. So the main two categories of volunteers are first the greeters and secondly the poll watchers. So the greeter is the face of the Democratic Party to the voter. There are lots of places in the county where there's never been greeters up until very recently, and even when Democrats are in a very small minority in those areas, they're really happy that folks are there. So if you're in an area that hasn't had greeters before, just know that by greeting each cycle, we are encouraging more and more Democrats to come out and vote. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So poll watchers are essentially greeters with the golden ticket. And the golden ticket is the official poll watcher certificate. It's a sheet of paper. It's just like a $100 bill. If it gets shredded or lost or the dog eats it, then it's gone. So you want to make sure that you don't lose it. The watchers have the authority to go in and out of the polling place at any time on election day. So if you have a voter that comes out and says, you know, something's not right, the watcher can go right in, speak to the judge of elections, and try to resolve the problem. 95 to 98% of the certificates that are issued come through the Delco Democratic Party. Those are valid throughout the entire county. If a candidate says to you, could you please be a greeter for me in my area, then their name, let's say you have a state representative who's saying, I want to be there. You can certainly serve as a watcher for that person, but their certificates are only valid wherever their name is on the ballot. So most of the precincts or most of the certificates will have either my name or they'll have a state party person, like someone running like Josh Shapiro, Nina Ahmad, someone like that, or Mary Gay Scanlon. All of those are countywide permits. So you do want to make sure that you keep that watcher certificate. You need to present it to the judge to show it to them. They may even want to feel it to make sure that the raised seal is there, but you want to make sure that you get it back from them, okay? You don't want to let them keep it or put it away somewhere. You want to make sure that if they insist on having it there while you're in there, then they have to leave it on the table. They shouldn't take it out of your sight. Okay, next slide. So the outside polling area. Greeting areas must be more than 10 feet from the polling place entrance as determined by the judge. So for example, let's say that there's a parking lot and then there's a vestibule, like an outer lobby to a building, and then an inner lobby, and then let's say that the polling place is inside a gymnasium. So where does the polling place entrance? Most people would call it the door of the gymnasium, but it's up to the judge. And essentially wherever that entrance is, both parties are allowed to be there. And from that distance out, you're allowed to have literature and signs and greet voters, but you may not intimidate or impede a voter in attempting to enter the poll. And you also may not ask the voter how they voted. That's also seen as a form of intimidation. If there's a police or constable needed, they can be called. The judge can call the constable if, for example, there's someone in the election area that's being unruly. But police officers aren't welcome to just come and hang out. They're only supposed to be there when they need to be, and that is also written down there. As a greeter, you're responsible for your little space. So if you are in an organization in a municipality that has everything organized, you might talk to your leader and find out that there's already going to be a table, there's going to be chairs, they have a case of water bottles underneath, you're good to go. Maybe even a heater, who knows? In other areas, you might show up and you might be the only Democrat that's ever been there before. So if no one else is there to set things up, you might want to go look in your basement or attic, see if you can find a folding chair. Even if you don't have a table, just having a chair to sit on is helpful. And if you do need to leave to take a break, to go to the facilities or go get a meal, don't leave all your stuff sitting out, because when you come back, you might find that they've somehow all disappeared. So you might want to leave one or two pieces of literature taped to a table, but I wouldn't leave everything out. Okay, next slide, please. So when you get to your location at the beginning of your shift, whether it's first thing in the morning or later in the day, if you have a watcher certificate, you do want to go inside and wait until things are quiet and ask, who is the judge? Present yourself, introduce yourself, and be kind. The judge is responsible for handling any problems, including machine malfunctions, power outages, confusion of a voter, anything like that. They will call the election bureau if it's something that the election bureau can resolve. And if you see something that they don't seem to be handling properly, you are there to help us make sure that all voters can vote. And you can call the election protection team if something seems out of line. And we'll talk about some of those events moving forward. Alrighty, next slide. So again, when you're in your area and you're all set up, please try to smile when you greet people. This is a happy day for us. We are happy that Democrats are coming to vote. We're happy that Republicans are coming to vote, because many of them are voting for our candidates. Many of them have seen the light and understand how great our candidates are. And frankly, when you are warm towards those voters, sometimes that has an impact on how they're going to vote later, because they realize that they're being treated kindly. You do want to direct voters to the correct voting location if they have a question about that, and report the problems that may arise. Now, most precincts will have either paper sample ballots that are about 4x6, or there'll be a big poster where you can show people how to vote. And the critical piece to these pieces of literature is not just what the name is, because all the Democrats are listed as D. They're kind of easy to find if people are doing straight ticket voting. But the problem is there's no more big button to push for Democrats. Even with the paper ballots in the primary, you could hit, I'm voting all D. At least I think you could in the primary. I might be wrong on that. Anyway, the last time I remember showing a family member how to do their paper ballot, it was on there. So, and certainly the absentees have always been there. In any case, now that's not happening. So people, when they vote, we are encouraging them to start at the bottom with their state representative, move up towards their state senator, and all the way up until they get to the presidential race. We find that if people start at the top, sometimes they think they're done. And we really don't want people to just come in and vote for the president and leave. We really want them to vote for all of those other races that make such a difference. And, hopefully you can answer any questions about those candidates. If you're going to be in your own town, hopefully you know who your local candidates are. If you're going to be assigned to a different town, you should know that within at least a week or 4 or 5 days of the election. You can go to the Delco Dems website, and read about that individual, get a link to their webpage and find out who they are, so that if people have questions for you, you can answer simple, basic questions. If you don't know the candidates well and you get moved in the middle of the day, the most important thing about voting for Democrats is that the Democrats in the State House and the State Senate, they're going to have leadership votes. And those leaders are the ones that are going to set the agenda and run the House of the Representatives or the Senate, and they will set the agenda. They'll draw the district maps, they'll do all kinds of things, and they'll make a big, big difference. So hopefully all of our voters will vote for the entire Democratic slate. Okay, next slide. There may be some voters that come with their vote by mail ballot that's completed. A voter who has applied for that ballot and wishes to vote in person needs to turn that in with all the envelopes, fill in a particular form from the judge, and then they'll take that ballot and they'll give the voter a brand new ballot that they can fill in and have it scanned. Another option, particularly if there's a long line by people, because people have been trying to surrender ballots all day and the line is an hour long, if that person says, I just need to vote, I don't have time, you can absolutely send them to any of the secure Delaware County drop boxes or the Voter Services Center. My understanding is that the Voter Services Center will be open late on Election Day. If people need to drop off their ballots, they will not be generating new replacement ballots at that time, but people will be able to drop them off, from what I understand. And not all the ballot boxes are open until 8 p.m. Some may close earlier. So you might want to double check your drop box in your neighborhood and see what's happening with that before you send someone there to skip the line. But a ballot that was mailed out is a valid ballot and it will be counted. Okay, next page, next slide. So basically, as I said earlier, you are an extra set of eyes at the polling place. We have hundreds of polling places, and overwhelmingly 95% of them will run really well. There won't be any issues. You're going to be greeting voters. You're going to be high-fiving with your elbow people and saying, isn't this great? Looking forward to good results tonight. But there may be an area that you're in, and this is why another reason we need you there, where let's say you come in and all the people with certain last names come out and say, they made me vote provisional. They told me I'm not in the book, which can happen. If someone's not in the registration book, the judge can instruct them to vote provisionally. But what if they misspelled it? Or what if only certain people are getting that to happen? If you have a pattern where there's some kind of voter suppression, where people are being told to vote provisional that you think is appropriate, maybe there's just crowding inside. Maybe there's an elected official inside electioneering. All kinds of things can happen. If this happens, we need you to let us know. And you want to call us. We'll tell you the number before Election Day. We want you to write down what happened or take notes on your phone or figure out a way to get that in. You can't use your phone inside to take pictures, but when you're outside, you can write yourself a text or an email to write down the information. You need the name of your polling place, the address, and the names and addresses of all the people involved that you can, particularly if it's a voter. You want their address and their best phone number. If they've been treated inappropriately, we need to know so we can reach out to them. The time is also helpful. In case there's any lawsuits, we need to know what times things happened. Okay, next page. Okay, so the next section is for poll watchers. Susan Chess wants to know, isn't a provisional ballot? Yes, but it's not counted until everything else is done. And so we don't want people to have to vote provisionally if they're allowed to get their vote scanned that day. Good question, thank you. Okay, so poll watchers, next slide, please. So people that are working on the election board, even if they're registered in one party or another, when they're serving on an election board, they are supposed to be neutral. They are not supposed to be engaging in any partisan behavior inside the polling place. And even when they go outside, their job is not to turn into a greeter. They can go out for a break, they can go get a meal, but they're not to be outside greeting. Constables may only go in to vote or if the judge has asked them to come in. And they may briefly visit the poll to say hello, but then they need to go. So if you see any elected officials or any constables or anybody inside electioneering, that's not okay. Or if the election board seems to be doing something that is partisan inside in particular, again, you're going to call the election protection team. Okay, okay, next slide. And before I go through these tricks, I want to say the reason you call the election protection team isn't just so that we know and put it on a piece of paper. We have hundreds of volunteer attorneys who are going to be scattered all around the county. And if in fact you have a problem in your polling place, their role is going to be to come to your polling place, to find you, to ask you what happened. If a judge is saying, I don't care, I'm breaking this rule because I want to do it and I don't want the Democrats to win, or whatever they say, it's up to the attorney then to go in and confront that judge. It's not up to you to tell a judge they're doing the wrong thing. You can ask them a question, but if they're saying, no, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, these attorneys have all been trained. They know what they're doing. They know how to deal with unruly people, and they know how to call the election board and say, excuse me, this is something that shouldn't be happening. So here's an example of something that might happen. Partisan check-in tables at the polling place. So when folks go in to vote, they go in and they tell the election board member their name. Their name is announced as voter number 234. They sign the book, they get their ballot, and they go and vote. In many polling places in Delaware County, before that person enters, there may well be a table. So I've even seen these being bipartisan tables of what's called a strike list. And that is a list from a political party that when folks go in, they're told, oh, you have to stop here. And if they stop here, let's say, oh, no, you have to tell us your address. Oh, did you move? Is your son coming to vote? This is not an election board activity. This is a partisan activity. Now, if it's more than 10 feet away from the election board and it's sort of a covert election board, if it's a covert partisan activity, what I would recommend is just to get people to not stop there. If there's a Republican table that's 10.5 feet away from the election board, what I typically do is go in front of them. I greet my voters. I tell them, here's your sample ballot. And by the way, you don't have to stop at that Republican table. And the folks that are at that table might not like my telling the voter, but that's true. And many times those lines do form and slow down the voters. So let the Republicans stop at the table and put their address in. The Democrats can go in and get their ballot and leave. So that's fine. Thank you, Trish, for that comment about the provisionals. So the next question is, or the next issue would be, if there were too many people, and especially now in the age of COVID, you need to make sure that there's at least 6 feet between people. And if people are crowding the opening, I would ask the judge to please come out and get people to spread back out again. People should not feel like they have to be breathed on to go vote. If there's anything else that you see that might be perceived as harassing or threatening to voters, absolutely give us a call. Maybe it's not illegal what they're doing. If you're not sure, call us, because if we don't find out till a week later, we can't fix it. So again, who is inside the polling place? Does everyone who's in there have a poll watcher certificate? Basically, in this election, we anticipate that only one person from each party will be inside watching the polls, and everybody else should be on the board. And if there's other people in there hanging around, they really shouldn't be there. You want to make sure there's adequate space, especially for social distancing in this time. And then, is there anything else unusual going on? Alrighty, next slide. So as it's happening in the chat, anyone who believes they're eligible and wants to vote should not leave the polling place without voting. And we'll talk a little bit more about provisional ballots. So if a voter's not on the list where they've applied for a vote by mail ballot, which they are not bringing back, nobody knows for sure whether or not they've actually voted yet. Like if they applied for the ballot and maybe they're trying to vote again, or maybe they voted and they forgot. Maybe they filled it in and they signed it all and they thought that it had been lost and a family member put it in the mail for them, which they're not supposed to do. But let's say that happened and it's in. That person is not allowed to vote twice. So they'd vote on a provisional ballot. If someone's name is not found in the poll book, they vote on a provisional ballot. And as Trish put into the comments, the provisional ballots are held to the side. And once all the other votes are tallied, if Jane Smith has a provisional ballot and they find out that Jane Smith's vote by mail ballot came in already, then the provisional is not counted. And let's say her name is Jane Oppenheimer Smith because she got married. That's up to the registration board to say, oh, you weren't in the book because this and that, and yes, that vote's allowed, or no, that vote's not allowed. That's not a decision that's made on election day. It's not anything you have to worry about. But the bottom line is, if someone says, I'm here to vote, and they should be allowed to vote on a provisional ballot. If it's early enough in the day and they're just not at the correct polling place, they can be directed back to their correct polling place by having the judge call the voter registration office to find out. The voter can call voter registration, or you can also go to Votes PA, or if you have it on your phone from canvassing, Vote Builder or Minivan can also help people find where they're supposed to be. There have been updates to polling places. People's polling places have been moved. They're not all the same places this summer. And so there may well be confusion of people who say, but I voted here for years. Or they might go to a place where there's no polling place and be trying to figure out where to go and just see a bunch of voters and say, can I come in here and vote? So, you might get all kinds of folks. Okay, so next slide. So first-time voters at a specific polling place will need voter identification, even if they voted at another polling place in the past. That kind of ID is in two categories, which is the photo ID, which would be a Pennsylvania driver's license or ID card, Commonwealth or US government ID, and here's more typos for the US passport or armed forces ID, student ID, or employee ID. You can also bring a non-photo ID, voter registration card, non-photo ID from the state or government, firearm permit, current utility bill, bank statement, or paycheck. And all of that is listed on that slide, that website. You can just look at Votes PA. It'll give it to you if you forget that information. And it will say in the book that they need to bring ID. So closing the poll, if you are being asked to close a poll, you may also, in a small number of precincts, be asked to give numbers during the day. So I'm going to talk about both of these, even though they're not both on the slide. Some of our candidates want to get a sense of what the turnout is in different parts of the county. Is it higher than we expect or lower? And if it's an area where we have a lot of voters, that candidate might choose to make more phone calls into one district than another based on what the reports are at maybe 11 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock. What's the total number of voters? So if you have your poll watch certificate, you can go in and look in the yellow book and see what the voter number is, or listen till they call the next voter number. Or you can ask a voter, say, I don't have any way to get inside, but do you mind listening and telling me on your way out what number you were? And a lot of times voters are happy to do that for you. That's not a form of intimidation. If they say, no, that's fine, just ask someone else. So if you're asked to close the poll, you need to be inside the polling place, inside the door before they close it at 8 o'clock. I would recommend no later than 8, quarter of 8 or 10 of 8. The judge is the person, or the machine operator is the person that will close the machine and begin the breakdown process. If you want to know what that is, you can go to the county website, to the Delco Votes website. There's many, many, many videos of how to run the precinct. And any of you that want to watch any of them, you certainly can. If something doesn't look right or smell right all day long, and including during the count, please call the Election Protection Hotline immediately. We will be in touch. And you want to just make sure that the count is acceptable, that it makes sense, that the numbers all add up. There will be a tape that will come out of each of the machines, and that should reflect what's going on in each of those machines. If there's a problem with the machines, there's also a cartridge, an electronic cartridge that will give the results, but ideally all the tapes will come out and be fine. If anyone's ever done this before, sometimes you might remember opening 50, 100, 200 absentee ballots at the polling place. That is not happening this year. All of the vote by mail and absentee ballots are being held at the Election Bureau. So none of those will be going out to polling places. Those will be counted by staff. And actually the pre-canvass of that starts at 7 a.m. They're going to start opening those envelopes, but they can't do any scanning, I don't think, until 8 o'clock at night. But in any case, whenever it is, they're going to start that count. And nothing will be announced, certainly till after the polls close. Okay, next page, next slide. So the machine will generate tallies, and it's multiple copies. So you, as a representative of the Democratic Party, are entitled to receive one of those tally reports and return sheets. And whoever it is that's given you the assignment to work in that precinct is going to be the person that's going to want those numbers back, most likely. You should insist on receiving them unless there's another Democratic watcher present. We don't plan to have more than one Democratic watcher in any precinct, but let's say you get there, you've been asked by the county to go, you've been asked by your municipal chair to go, and by the way, one of the state reps forgot to tell somebody they were sending a watcher because they want the actual tally. If that other person wants it, just give us a call, let us know. As long as one Democrat at least gets it, that's the main thing. And the copy will also be posted outside once the count is complete. But I don't anticipate you'll have more than one watcher inside for the count. Alrighty, next slide. So again, absentee ballots get their own slide. They will not be counted at the precincts. That's good for the judges. They don't want to have to do that. Alrighty, next slide. Okay, so this is some stuff that we've already talked about a little bit, but just to clarify and be sure, again, the only people out inside are the election board, the voters, and poll watchers. The judge isn't in charge of doing this. If he doesn't want to do it or there's improper conduct, please call the election protection line. Electioneering is not permitted inside at all or within that 10-foot zone. Voters may wear their gear, their buttons. They can wear whatever t-shirt they want. It can say anything they want. But you and I, as either election board members, poll watchers, or those folks may not do that inside. So when I'm serving as a greeter, I typically will wear some kind of Democratic gear. I might have a campaign button for one or two of the candidates. I will take them off and put them in my pocket and pull out my poll watcher certificate if I have to go inside. But a voter absolutely should not have to take off their gear or change any of their clothing. Voters should not voice support for candidates inside the polling place or inside the 10-foot zone, and that's up to the judge to work that out. Any attempt to request information, again, from the voter, how did you vote, may be viewed as a form of intimidation, so please don't do that. All righty, next slide. So assistance can be requested from the Election Bureau if a voter is having a hard time getting their pen to fill in that dot, or they can't see something, or they need help. They are certainly allowed to ask the Election Bureau members for help. Many times there's a notice in the book that someone, let's say in the old days, couldn't reach the top levers. They needed someone to help them hit the top buttons. Whatever kind of help people need, the Election Bureau member can do that if the voter asks them. It can't be the judge, and it cannot be a union leader. Committee members, other elected officials may also assist unless they're on the ballot. And if a person receives assistance, it should be noted in the book. My understanding is also that you might bring a family member to help you, assist you, and that would be listed in the polling book as well. So the name of the person assisting should be noted in the poll book. Okay, and the next slide. So watchers may not sit at the table with the judge. They are not part of the election board. Now, the watchers may handle the election materials if the judge wants to let them do it if things are quiet, but there's not an absolute right to do that. So for example, if you have a candidate that wants to know the name of every voter that came in, now that has happened in the past, probably not this year, that's the way it rolls. You can either listen in or you can say, can I please look at the book? And the clerk will help you look at it when they have time, but it's at their discretion. So after a voter gives their name, when they come in to vote, as we said before, their name should be repeated out loud, and then it gets entered in the book. So that's the easiest way to do the strike off. I hope I didn't confuse you with that, but I don't think too many of you will be keeping strike lists. It's just a good thing to know about and have in your back pocket in case that request comes up in the future, but probably not this cycle. Okay, next page. So election protection, we've talked about them before. We're here for you to give us a call. When you do call, please step outside of the polling place. You don't want to interfere with voting. And frankly, if a judge is not being helpful, you don't want to say, hey, this judge is a meanie right in front of him. So please record as much information as you can, phone numbers, emails of the voters that are having the problem so that we can reach them, what time things happen. And again, please don't leave voicemails when you call. Please go ahead and keep on dialing through the phone numbers until you get one of us. And if you think something's wrong and you're an attorney, please don't go to court by yourself. Please let us know. Please tell us what's happening and we will try to fix the problem. Alrighty, next slide. So finally, just a little bit of a recap of the contact information we gave you before. The voter registration office, both Delaware County and Pennsylvania, and the Delco 10's headquarters. We will be sending out election protection information, both as a PDF and paper copies will be provided with poll watcher certificates closer to election day. Okay, and I think that's our last content slide. I think that's followed by our incident report so that you can see what's on the form. We will be handing out paper incident report forms on election day so that you can tell us what's happening. And then that will be put into a central database so that we can look for trending and seeing what might be going on moving forward each year. And then the last slide is our thank you slide. This wouldn't happen without you. We need volunteers to run fair elections. And we're just so grateful for your help. And we know that folks that have done this over the years have really made a difference for the voters of Delaware County. And we're just beyond grateful for your help. So I'm going to now switch back to the chat, which you don't have too many comments. The folks that signed up to volunteer, your municipal chair is typically the person who will let you know where you're needed. So Tanya, if you can type in the name of your town, I can tell you who your chair is. And if you haven't been able to talk to them, we can communicate again later. If anyone else on this call needs help figuring out where they need to go, if you live in Swarthmore, I'm waiting till everybody else has been assigned. And then we're going to fill in the areas of greatest need. Lansdowne, Tanya, I want you to send me an email because Tanya, Lansdowne now has enough helpers. So I'll be in touch with you about where else you might be able to be used in Delaware County. I'm going to put my, so my email is delcochair@gmail. And the person that's in Yaden, if you email me, I will connect you with Tony Truehart, who is the chair of Yaden. And we hope that each and every one of you will have an opportunity to serve and help us out to greet voters. Now, there was a question about being in the clerk role or in a minority inspector role or working in the polling place. This training is for greeters and poll watchers. The county government is in charge of training poll workers. And the poll workers training, most of the links for poll worker training are already up on the Delco Votes website. If you just use Delco Votes ! It'll probably come up on that page. There will be a tab there for for poll election board members. And on that tab are probably 8 or 10 videos. My understanding is that the bulk of the training is going to be online, that you can go look at all those videos, and that there'll be some kind of a quiz to make sure that you've checked them all. There will also be some online training directly of videos that are not quite ready yet. And I believe that there will be a small number of in-person trainings as well. But if you are assigned to be on an election board and need that training, please go to the Delco Votes page. If you can't find it, email me and say, I'm a poll worker, I can't find it. I'll email you that link. We want you to be able to get the information that you need, but we are not running the county organization of the Democratic Party is not in charge of the election. We're supporting the election, and lots of Democrats are, hundreds of them are working on election boards across the county, but the assignments are made and the appointments are made through the county. Okay, so what other questions did we miss? Tricia, is there something that I didn't talk about yet you can think of? Let me try to unmute you. Oh, good. There you go.
So I know one of the questions we've been getting a lot is about, there are a lot of opportunities right now to get a mail-in ballot and cast it early at a drop box or a voter service center, which I believe you went over. But what about somebody who shows up on election day with their mail-in ballot? We've been getting a lot of questions about that. Well, number one, unlike in the primary, there won't be a place at your polling place to drop off a mail-in ballot. So if you have people coming up with their completed mail-in ballot in the secrecy envelope, in the return envelope, you'll have to direct them to one of the 32 drop boxes within the county or a voter service center. And all the addresses of all of those are online, so you can help direct them. If they come with a ballot that maybe they've completed it, maybe not, but they don't want to cast that ballot, they want to vote on the machine, so to speak, in person, they will have to have both the ballot and the return envelope that you would sign on the back. Those will have to be handed over to the judge of elections, spoiled, They'll have to sign a declaration to be able to vote on the machine. So they'll need to have both of those two things, the ballot and the return envelope, sign a declaration, and turn over the ballot and the envelope to the judge of election. So all of that will take time. It will slow things down. And if they don't have both the ballot and the envelope, their only option at that point would be to vote provisionally. And then a lot of questions have been coming up too about social distancing at the polls and COVID precautions. I don't know how much you went over that, Colleen.
Well, yeah, the inside poll workers are supposed to be getting lots of PPE from the county. We have ordered masks and hand sanitizer to give to our greeters. I'm not sure if the hand sanitizer has come in yet, but we're going to try to supply that to everyone. Most of these polling places, many of them are at schools or other buildings where you should be able to go in and use the bathroom to wash your hands. But it is challenging, and we want you to be safe. Your safety is more important than anything. So if you're in a situation where you feel like you're unsafe, if you run out of hand sanitizer and you don't feel comfortable, protect yourself. If you need to eat, please go eat. If you need to go home and get some supplies and come back again, please do that. We don't want anyone to do anything that will jeopardize their health. And if you feel like people are too close to you, please go in and talk to the judge and say, these people from the other side keep on harassing me. I know I'm outside the 10-foot thing, but they won't give me any space. If the judge won't help you, then call election protection. We want you to be safe. And yes, we're going to try to provide hand sanitizer to everyone and masks to those who need it. I think most people have masks, but for those that don't, we're going to have some supplies. But we don't have, full body armor for you. We don't have rebreather masks. If you're not comfortable being out in public in an outside space, or if you get there and you find out that this is a crammed little space that you feel uncomfortable in, call us and tell us, like, I can't stay here. We'll try to move somebody around to cover that area. But your safety is more important than anything. Andrew was asking about how many poll watchers from each side are allowed in a polling place at a time. And now, correct me, Tricia, if I'm wrong, but I believe that there should be one from each party at most. I think in other elections in larger buildings, I have seen multiple watchers. And in that case, it would be equal numbers from each party. But I think at this point, that most judges won't want more than one from each party. And it shouldn't really need to be more than one from each party at any time.
Right.
Is that correct, Tricia, by statute? It's
one from each party, and then candidates can have one. But you're right that in today, judges of election are going to be concerned about the number of people in any one space, and frankly, all of us are too. So right. I don't expect there to be crowds in polling places.
But for example, and I'm glad you said this. So for example, let's say there are 5 Republican watchers in there. One is the countywide Republican watcher. One is doing it for Dasha. One is doing it for the state rep candidate. One is doing whatever. And they're all in there chit-chatting and they're hanging around. And you feel like the Democratic voters are coming in and saying, there's too many people in there. I don't like it in there. What do? You call election protection. If the judge won't clear the space because he says, these are my buddies, I want them hanging around. COVID's a myth, call election protection and they will help you with that. Shirley wants to know about threats of violence. Anytime there's a threat of violence anywhere in the United States of America, you should hopefully be able to call 911. I know that's hopefully for some people. We don't expect that to happen. We do have a plan. The sheriff's office has a plan. If you feel like there's something that's unsafe, Pennsylvania is an open carry state. If someone has a firearm in their possession, that is not an offense. But if they hold it in a menacing way, or if Trish, correct me if I'm wrong, if they have a long arm, that's not okay. But if they have a personal weapon that they have holstered and they're not touching it and they're not pointing it at anyone and they want to go in and vote, they're allowed to do that. But that's not a threat of violence. If somebody threatens violence, absolutely, you can notify the judge. If the judge isn't quickly getting support, you should go ahead and call the constable or the police if it's not something, particularly if it's outside, I would certainly do that. But the judge has purview inside. Do you agree with that, Tricia?
Yeah, I would. I would alert the judge to it, and if the judge doesn't call 911, you call 911, and then call us at election protection and let us know what's happening.
Now, the mask requirement, some of the polling places are in buildings that require masks. For example, schools. There are certain schools that say you have to have a mask to come in here. That is not eradicated by the fact that it's election day. So if that's the rule in the building, that's the rule. However, let's say that it's in some other location that is not a school, that doesn't have a mask requirement. The election board cannot mandate that voters wear masks, but in order to keep everything safe, what has typically been done in the primary is that if the non-masked voter wants to come in, they can request entrance. The judge can let everybody else through. All the masked people can come through and leave. And then they can allow that one voter in, allow them to vote. And then as soon as they leave, they can essentially reopen the polling place. That may well happen. And if you think somebody's being belligerent and insisting on breathing in people's faces, that's a threat. So then you call election protection. And if you feel so, you can also call 911. Okay. But the staff is required to wear masks. So if you're seeing that election board members are not wearing masks, that's not okay. That's something that the judge should enforce. And if he's not enforcing it, again, give us a call. Okay.
And regarding the question about open carry in certain buildings, this is correct. There are certain buildings that by their nature, guns are not allowed in, whether they're permitted or not, if they're permitted to be carried or not. We will have a list of polling places where no guns are allowed, regardless of permit or not. And so if people are working one of those particular polling places, we will let you know that you are in one of those.
Okay. Thank you, Tricia. All right. Anything else that anybody wants to know about? All right. Well, I hope you found this helpful. If you have further questions, just email me again. My email is delcochair@gmail.com. And we're just beyond grateful